Canelo Alvarez was diagnosed on Monday with a fracture in his right thumb and will not fight again this year. Golden Boy Promotions announced. Alvarez was due to return on December 10th against an opponent to be determined, but that fight is now off. Now, despite the changes to Alvarez's schedule, Golden Boy spokesman Stephen Friedman said it does not in any way alter the tentative plans for a mega fight between Alvarez and unified middleweight title holder Gennady Golovkin, September of next year. Max, you are working this fight, of course, for HBO on Saturday. Will a Canelo Triple G fight happen in 2017?
Yes, I believe it will. Of course, I believe Mayweather-Pacquiao would happen years before it actually did happen, and that's part of the legacy of that era. Mayweather and Pacquiao showed everybody, if you have an opponent out there that people want to see you fight, you can keep milking pay-per-view money because the carrot of that opponent keeps the audience interested and keeps them buying your fights no matter who you fight. And until people see that the fans stop showing up, they try to keep milking it. In this case, Golden Boy, the promoter of Alvarez, Oscar De La Hoya, who never ducked anyone as a fighter, has been on the record talking about, we want to make this fight happen, we want to make this fight happen. It needs to, quote-unquote, marinate. Triple G needs to be a bigger star. Triple G is selling out arenas really all across the world at this point, on both coasts, L.A. and New York, in London most recently. He's become a big star. Alvarez is an even bigger star. And Stephen A., I feel bad for Canelo because Canelo is not the ducking type, but he's also deferring to his team, to his promoter, saying that fight's not worth the money yet. And because he doesn't want to throw his promoter under the bus, he's taking bullets from fans saying, you're ducking Triple G. When I believe the truth is Golden Boy, the promoter, is for the time being ducking Triple G because they know there's a good chance their guy can lose the fight. So they want to milk a pay-per-view, which they just did this year. And they want to do one on Cinco de Mayo weekend next year and postpone Triple G to the fall of 2017, which better late than never, but there's really no good reason from a fan's point of view why we have to wait past May for that fight.
Well, first of all, part of my brilliance is knowing that I'm not and listening to brilliance when I hear it. And when it comes to boxing, I completely and unequivocally defer to you because I know you know. And by the way, thank you for taking me to that HBO post-Emmy party the other night. It was off the chain.
Well, Stephen A. knows his boxing, too. I know this because you and me have been talking about boxing for years.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. But I defer to you, my brother. And here's the deal, Max. You didn't want to... Canelo doesn't want to throw Oscar De La Hoya under the bus. You certainly don't want to do that. I will. It's all on Oscar. And I say this respectfully. This is just an opinion. It's not reporting or anything other than the fact that I did speak to Triple G face-to-face months ago, and he talked to me then about how they were ducking him. I can quote him on that because he said it on my radio show. But when it comes to Oscar De La Hoya, who I respect, I know we've had jabs in the past, but it's all in fun. I got a lot of love and a lot of respect for Golden Boy, but I got to look into this camera and call Oscar De La Hoya out on national television right now, not just because he never ran from anybody as a fighter, with the exception of running from Felix Trinidad the last 4 rounds when they fought one another. That's the only time I ever saw him run in his career. Outside of that, he never ran for anybody. But Max, correct me if I'm wrong. Was not Oscar De La Hoya a breath of fresh air when he came into the promotional business? When you had Don King and Bob Arum and Lou DiBella and the crew, everybody, those three pretty much dominating the promotional landscape. Oscar De La Hoya comes along, and he's a breath of fresh air. Why? Because he was willing to represent fighters in an upstanding fashion. Certainly not to say that Bob Arum is not. I love Bob Arum. But the point is that when you look at Oscar De La Hoya, he gave you the impression that the fans would never be cheated because he was about the business of giving fans the fights they wanted to see. And now that he's got Canelo Alvarez, which is his cash cow, suddenly he's adopted the mentality of the people he decried in the past. Oscar De La Hoya, with this Canelo avoiding Triple G, with Canelo summoning Triple G into the ring after he knocked out the undersized glass jaw of Amir Khan. Triple G calling him into the ring, talking about, I'm Mexican, we don't mess around, and we don't run from anybody. And Oscar sitting back there laughing and smiling, and then to come out here publicly and talking about how he made Triple G an 8-figure offer, which was very disingenuous. It seems to me that Oscar De La Hoya, is replicating the very actions of what he decried from other promoters. He talked about Bob Arum. He talked about the Don Kings of the world. He talked about them in very unflattering terms, and here he is acting like he says they acted.
Listen,
it's wrong.
Dana
it's
White,
wrong.
Dana White doesn't do this.
He should be giving us the fight.
Dana White doesn't do this. Of course, he's promoting both sides of the fight. It's a little different when you promote both guys.
Yep.
Will you take a risk with your guy? Oscar is behaving right now. You mentioned Canelo's the economic engine of his promotional company. 100% that's true.
No question.
And he is acting as though he doesn't think his guy's going to win that fight. And that's not good for anybody, including Canelo. And when Canelo tells me in the ring that we just made Triple G the biggest offer of his career and we haven't heard back, the fact is, when the details came out about that, that's what Canelo told me during the post-fight interview this last Saturday night.
That's what I was leading to. Go ahead and say it. Yep.
The details came out. It's for next November that the offer is made. That's not a serious thing. The negotiations take place between now and then. The bottom line is, Triple G wanted this fight for a long time. Canelo, I think, is bothered by the fact that fans say he's ducking, because believe me, listen, anyone who doesn't know boxing, Canelo ain't the ducking kind. But his promoter doesn't want to take that risk against Triple G, a man that most consider the baddest man on the planet.
Let's call this what it is. Last point. You can't knock Oscar for being the astute businessman that's trying to put himself in a position to make the most money. But it's two things that are very important. Number one, Oscar De La Hoya right now looks like a flaming hypocrite because he used to talk about promoters doing exactly what he's doing right now by prohibiting Canelo from having this fight. And the second part is this. Not only are you doing that, but guess what? If Canelo loses to Triple G, how is that going to compromise Canelo's money? Canelo's still going to come back and still be a beast and still make his money. Even if a potential rematch, it could be mega.
Here's the ultimate irony. Oscar De La Hoya, the fighter, was being promoted perfectly by Bob Arum. They were avoiding the toughest fights, making the winnable fights, and he was being criticized by hardcore boxing fans. Why don't you fight this guy, this guy, this guy? He leaves Top Rank, makes not always the best business decision, as Floyd Mayweather did, takes a ton of risks, wins some, loses some, but has his own kind of pride now when he looks back in his career that he gained control of his career and fought everyone, not just Floyd and Hopkins and Trinidad, like everyone, Mosley, everybody. And Canelo is going to want the same thing for himself by the time his career is over. He may need to get control of his own career and start dictating to his promoter, look, I don't like the criticism, I got to fight that guy.
I call that an inside
Max,
look.
I'm going to be calling out. Molly, Max, I'm going to be calling out. I'm going to be talking about Oscar De La Hoya a lot over the next few months. This is unacceptable. Unacceptable.
All right, we will stay tuned for that. And Max, thank you for breaking that down for us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Coming up next, we've seen many players follow Colin Kaepernick's lead, deciding not to stand or making some sort of statement during the national anthem in order to bring attention to social injustice. And last night was no different, as the Eagles' Malcolm Jenkins, Stephen Means, and Ron Brooks stood with raised fists during the national anthem on Monday Night Football. Meanwhile, more tragedy has struck our country. In Tulsa, an unarmed black man was killed by a white Oklahoma officer who was responding to a stalled vehicle. The man can be seen in police video walking away from officers and toward his SUV with his hands up before he approaches the driver's side door, where he drops to the ground after being shocked with a stun gun, then fatally shot. This is exactly the type of thing the players have been trying to bring awareness to. Stephen A., how long do you expect these protests to continue?
It's not going to stop anytime soon. And when things like what transpired in Tulsa the other day, continue to happen, it's my fear that it's only going to intensify. And I want to say that if it does, one could argue that there's going to be legitimacy to the protest that ultimately will come forward. I want to read something to y'all a friend of mine sent me from Dr. Martin Luther King's speech, obviously in the 60s, of course, before he was assassinated. He was talking about protests that were ongoing, obviously fighting for civil rights and what have you. And he talked about the things that existed.
He said it speaks to people wanting these speaking to people wanting these protests to stop at the time. He said the sweltering summer of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until there is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. Those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. Now, I bring those words up because on my radio show on Sirius XM, Mad Dog Sports Radio, every weekday from 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time, I've had a multitude of white individuals call into my show, very thoughtful, God-fearing, decent Americans, just with a different point of view. And they were saying, when is this going to stop? I had one caller call me yesterday and say, if any of these Eagles protest tonight in any way, I'm going to be done with them. And I simply retorted by saying to him, think about what you're saying. They're getting on one knee or they're raising the fist, okay? That's what they're doing. They didn't impede anybody's ability to watch the game. They didn't impede the game from happening in any way. They didn't stall traffic. They didn't serve as an inconvenience to anybody. All they did was bring attention to inequities and inequalities and injustices that have been taking place in this country for decades, if not centuries. That's the reality of the situation here. And when you have people, and I have friends and loved ones who are completely against Colin Kaepernick, who are completely disgusted with him and done with him and anybody who mirrors his behavior because their mentality is, how dare you insult our nation, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, how? How is he doing that? When he's bringing attention to the fact that our Pledge of Allegiance, that our Star-Spangled Banner, that, being indivisible with liberty and justice for all, the words that this country was founded upon, when you're challenging whether or not it's living up to that, because some people are receiving it, but other people in this nation, particularly black individuals, some who appear to be unarmed, are not receiving. How could you have a problem with that? Especially when the athletes themselves have specifically articulated, in no way are they talking about our military. In no way are they talking about our servicemen and women who honor our country with their service. They're not talking about that. They're talking about the injustices that have taken place in this country, the violence that has been perpetrated against individuals, particularly of African-American descent. Nobody said that white folks aren't suffering from violence. Nobody said that Latinos aren't suffering from violence. What they're saying is that what we see in the news, what we see continuously perpetrated with little to nothing being done about it, is that black individuals are suffering at the hands of some of these police officers when they're unarmed, whereas an Uber driver who happens to be white in Michigan shoots 6 people and he's arrested. A Dylan Roof in South Carolina murders 9 folks in a church in South Carolina, black folks. And not only is he arrested, which means he lived, of course, but he's also taken to Burger King to get a bite to eat because he was hungry. How is it that black people are dying, but white folks are getting arrested? That's the issue here. And so it's something that needs to be addressed. And you can have a debate as to how it can go further from here, because just doing this, what's the ultimate thing you're trying to achieve? What will define success in this quest? All of those things are legitimate questions. All of those things are the things that need to be discussed. But what cannot happen and what cannot be tolerated is us as a community and us as a nation turning a blind eye and a deaf ear to what exactly is transpiring. Every time we want to sit up there and quell the noise about what's transpiring, some other event comes forward to remind us that we may not even be second-class citizens in this nation, that our lives really, really don't matter. And something needs to be said about it, and something needs to be done about it. So whether we agree or disagree with Colin Kaepernick, the moment he said social and racial injustice, the moment he brought that cause up, and he specifically articulated that in no way was he speaking against our military, from the moment he did that, I had no problem with it. And the fact that other people do says something to me about them, not about Colin Kaepernick.